Chapter 12. Sapphire Palace, a few days later. The foreign dignitaries had finally departed, and the once grandiose atmosphere of the Sapphire Palace seemed to return to its usual solemn silence. Countess Rozalia, who had only just arrived, could feel the weight of the palace's quiet, a stark contrast to the lively atmosphere just days ago. She had been shown to her room, and the modesty of the quarters surprised her. She had expected more given her rank, but the room was sparse compared to the palace's usual splendor. The pale blue walls were adorned with subtle touches of gold trim, a soft color that seemed to mimic the famed sapphires the palace was named for. A plush rug lay in the center of the room, its deep blue hue contrasting against the dark, polished wooden floors. The bed, though large, had no ornate canopy, only simple silk sheets and a fine, muted quilt. Carved wooden furniture filled the space, an elegant wardrobe with brass handles and a desk made from polished oak. There was also a small vanity, its mirror framed with intricate, delicate designs. A large window let in the light of the late afternoon, revealing the sprawling gardens outside. Rozalia took in the room with a sharp eye. The simplicity of it did not escape her. It's almost as though they'd purposefully kept things humble, she thought, though she quickly brushed it aside. There were more important matters to address. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Jeanette soon started to voice her grievances, her voice tinged with annoyance. "I don't understand why I'm being treated like this, Aunt Rozalia." Jeanette huffed, crossing her arms as she looked around the room. "Lucas has practically taken over the entire Sapphire Palace." Rozalia, still taking in the modest quarters, glanced at her niece with interest. "What do you mean by taken over?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed beside Jeanette. Jeanette let out a sharp breath, her frustration evident. "He's got his own side of the palace, the biggest room, and now he's even forbidding me from going to certain parts of the building. Not only that, I can't even go into the dining room if he's using it. What's worse, the maids, they all favor him. It's like they all hate me." Rozalia's brow furrowed as she processed this information. "Lucas is given residence here because of the Emperor's orders, is that right?" she asked, her voice turning calculating. Jeanette nodded, her face flushed with frustration. "Yes. He's been here for years, ever since he became the Golden Magician. But why does he get to make all the rules? Why does he get to act like he owns the place?" Her eyes narrowed with resentment. Rozalia sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the situation. She thought back to the banquet, where Lucas had argued with Ezekiel. His sharp intellect was undeniable, even at such a young age. She recalled how the young boy had effortlessly taken control of that conversation with his poise and cunning. The Emperor sees value in him. He's not just a simple magician, he's a genius at 14. And that's why he's here. As this thought crossed her mind, Rozalia's attention returned to Jeanette. "This girl is blind to the power she holds." She pursed her lips. "Jeanette," she began, "how many social gatherings have you participated in lately?" Jeanette looked away, discomfort flickering in her eyes. "I used to attend a few with low-ranking nobles, but now? None." "Not a single one," she muttered, her voice quieter as she tried to brush it off. Rozalia studied her niece's face, noting the shift in her demeanor. "And what does that say about your position, Jeanette?" she asked, her voice cutting through the air. Jeanette frowned, looking down at her hands. "I know, but it's fine. I'm not too concerned about it. Besides, Athanasia doesn't attend social gatherings much either. She's always with father, after all." Rozalia's expression tightened, her green eyes narrowing as she regarded her niece. "You're wrong." Her voice dropped, becoming cold and precise. "Athanasia may not attend those gatherings, but she's with the Emperor every day, involved in the affairs of state, learning and growing in power." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You, however, are being ignored. Left in the shadows, with nothing to show for yourself. Is that what you want?" Jeanette hesitated, then looked away, her throat tight. "I don't want that, but what can I do? Father doesn't even look at me." Rozalia's eyes gleamed with a cold ambition. It's time you stopped waiting for him to notice you. If you want to be someone in this empire, you need to act. She leaned in, her voice lowering to a whisper. You must make your presence known. Athanasia may be in line for the throne, but you can still carve a place for yourself. Jeanette glanced at her aunt, her face conflicted, but something in her eyes flickered, hope. But how? Start by taking control of your own path, Rozalia advised. You must show the emperor that you're worthy of his attention, not just as a princess, but as a political force. You must make him see you, and not just as a child waiting to be noticed. Countess Rozalia and Jeanette stepped into one of the lounge rooms, a spacious area adorned with plush seating and a view of the palace gardens. The sunlight streamed in, casting a golden hue over the room. At the far side they found Lucas, reclining on a couch with his eyes closed. The sunlight bathed his messy black hair, and as he shifted slightly, his ruby-red eyes glinted in the light, sharp and unyielding, even in his relaxed state. Jeanette felt a surge of frustration bubble inside her. She had been avoiding him for days, trying to avoid confrontation. But with her aunt at her side, she couldn't hold it back anymore. Lucas stirred as he sensed their presence, lifting his head slightly. When his eyes locked onto Jeanette and Rozalia, his gaze was cold, calculating, as if he had already assessed the situation in a single moment. You're not allowed here, he stated flatly, his voice tinged with an air of authority that only further irked Jeanette. He didn't even bother to sit up properly as he spoke, his tone dismissive, almost bored. Jeanette's fists clenched at her sides. She bit her lip, the urge to retort rising within her, but it was her aunt who acted first. Countess Rozalia stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the tension in the room. Lucas, you've overstayed your welcome. This is the Sapphire Palace, not your personal domain. Her words were clear, her tone laced with authority, yet not lacking the threat of something deeper. Lucas simply raised an eyebrow, his ruby eyes glinting with a mocking amusement. And, he asked lazily, as if challenging her. He leaned back further into the couch, his posture relaxed, his hands behind his head as he yawned. What are you going to do about it? Jeanette could no longer contain her anger. Her voice cracked as she finally spoke. You've been controlling everything here, Lucas. I'm not allowed in the lounges, I can't even go near the gardens if you're there. You've taken over this entire palace, and for what? Because you're the emperor's special guest? Lucas snorted, the sound dismissive and derisive. His lips twisted into a sly smile, and he finally opened his eyes, the ruby depths staring back at Jeanette without a flicker of warmth. It's kind of funny, isn't it, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. You took the same subjects as the princess. The duke even got you the same tutors as her. And yet you've got nothing to show for it. His gaze turned sharp, almost predatory. You're truly pathetic, aren't you? Jeanette's chest tightened, the sting of his words hitting her like a physical blow. She wanted to shout back, to defend herself, but the truth hung in the air like an unspoken weight. Her heart pounded in her chest, her fingers trembling as she tried to maintain her composure. Rozalia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing, her sharp voice cutting through the heavy air. Lucas, that was uncalled for, she warned, though her tone was laced with an edge of something darker, something far more dangerous. She was used to control, used to making others listen. But even she couldn't control the storm that Lucas was. I don't know who you think you are, Rozalia continued, her gaze not leaving his face, but you have no right to speak to my niece like that. She may not have your precious power, but she is still the daughter of the emperor, and she will not be belittled in my presence. Lucas met her gaze with a nonchalant expression, unfazed by the reprimand. You think I care about her being the emperor's daughter? He scoffed, sitting up now, his posture shifting into something more defiant. She's nothing more than a pawn, like the rest of them. She's got nothing that makes her stand out. The princess is at least competent. Jeanette? He shook his head with a smirk. She's just a useless princess holding a title. Jeanette's fists clenched tighter, but the words cut deeper than she was willing to admit. Despite her frustration, she stood there, unable to speak, Her body stiff and her face flushed with the combination of anger and humiliation. Rozalia glanced at her niece, a soft sigh escaping her lips. She had always known that Jeanette was sensitive, that she was used to being ignored, but hearing such words from Lucas, a boy who was so self-assured, so confident in his own abilities, it only made the challenge harder. The room fell into a heavy silence. The tension in the air was palpable, almost suffocating. Rozalia looked at Lucas one last time before turning to Jeanette. "You're right to be angry, but don't let him get under your skin. He's just a child with a talent for magic and no respect for the world around him." Lucas smirked, his ruby eyes flicking between them as he watched the exchange with detached amusement. He had already won this round, it seemed. And perhaps, in his mind, he had always known he would. Rozalia, however, wasn't about to let him win for long. "You'll come to realize, Lucas, that power is more than just magic," Rozalia said softly, almost as if to herself. Then, turning to Jeanette, she placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's time we remind him that titles and bloodlines matter. The Emperor's daughter might not have magic like him, but she has something he will never have, position." Jeanette's eyes met her aunt's, a glimmer of determination breaking through the cloud of self-doubt. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to change the balance of power in this palace. The soft murmur of the afternoon breeze rustled the leaves, but Ezekiel could hardly hear it. His gaze was fixed across the shimmering lake, where the Emperor and Princess Athanasia were taking a leisurely boat ride. He leaned against the pillar of the palace's colonnade, hidden just enough to observe them without being noticed. As the boat gently drifted, he couldn't help but admire how Athanasia seemed to glow in the sunlight. Her platinum blonde hair, like strands of woven light, fluttered gracefully in the wind, creating a halo effect around her. The light caught her hair, turning it into a soft golden glow. Every movement she made, from the subtle shift of her posture to the way she laughed, soft, musical, and full of life, struck him as something almost ethereal. He was entranced, watching how her crystal blue eyes reflected the sky above and the sea below. They were like the meeting point of the heavens and the earth, vast and endless. There was no doubt in his mind, Princess Athanasia was, indeed, the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. His thoughts were interrupted when the conversation between the Emperor and his daughter caught his ear. It was a rare moment of respite, a break from their duties. The Emperor, usually so stern and focused on his empire's matters, spoke to her with an ease and warmth that only a father could show. "I'm glad you insisted on taking a break, Athanasia," the Emperor said, his voice full of affection. "You've been pushing yourself too hard lately." "I don't mind, Daddy," she replied with a soft smile, her voice as calming as the tranquil waters around them. "But I will make sure to take it easy. There are always duties to attend to." Ezekiel couldn't help but envy the bond they shared, the Emperor's unwavering affection for his daughter, his protective nature, and the ease with which he showed it. If only the Emperor would show the same level of affection to Jeanette. If only he would recognize her as he did Athanasia. With that thought, Ezekiel sighed and turned to leave. As he walked through the palace gardens, he happened upon Anna Green, the young secretary to Princess Athanasia. She was standing near the fountain, carefully reviewing a set of documents in her hands. Ezekiel stopped in his tracks, raising an eyebrow when he saw her. She was younger than him, around the same age as both Jeanette and Princess Athanasia, a youthful but determined presence. "Hello, my lord," Anna greeted him, offering a polite bow. Ezekiel nodded in acknowledgement, his eyes softening slightly. "You're Anna, right?" She smiled, clearly pleased at the recognition. "Yes, my lord. It's a pleasure to meet you." They exchanged pleasantries, Anna talking about the latest reports regarding the princess's meetings, how Princess Athanasia had been tirelessly working on matters related to the empire. The conversation flowed easily, her calm demeanor making it easy to speak with her. "The princess is lucky to have someone like you helping her," Ezekiel said, genuinely impressed by Anna's professional demeanor. He hadn't expected the young secretary to carry such weight in her position. Anna smiled brightly. "I'm simply doing my duty, my lord. It's an honor to assist her." After a few moments of light conversation, Ezekiel decided it was time to take his leave. "I'll leave you to your work, Anna. It was nice speaking with you." "Likewise, my lord." "Have a pleasant day," she replied, bowing once more before returning her attention to the documents in her hands. As Ezekiel walked away, his mind lingered on the image of Athanasia and the emperor, still fresh in his thoughts. He couldn't help but wonder how different things would have been if Jeanette had been treated with the same love, the same recognition. The connection he had seen between father and daughter was something he longed to see with Jeanette and the emperor. Maybe one day, if things could change, if he could find a way to bring about the emperor's affection for her. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the lavishly adorned room, the white walls of the garnet palace exuding both power and intimidation. At the center of it all sat Emperor Claude de Algerobelia, a man whose very presence commanded absolute authority. Across from him stood Lucas, his posture relaxed despite the weight of the emperor's gaze, and Athanasia, who was doing everything in her power to keep him from abandoning his assigned task. "No, don't. Please, 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 you promised to keep an eye on her." Athanasia cried out, her hands clenched around the sleeve of Lucas's robe, shaking it slightly in frustration. Lucas, unfazed by the princess's outburst, merely sighed, looking down at her with an expression of exasperation. "That was before I found out how annoying it would be," he said flatly. His complete lack of regard for the situation would have earned him an execution order from any other ruler, but Claude merely narrowed his piercing blue eyes at him. Athanasia, determined not to let him get his way, pressed closer, blinking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. She batted her lashes, her lower lip quivering ever so slightly as she spoke in a sweet, coaxing voice. "Lucas, you're the only person who can do this. We don't trust anyone else." Lucas's red eyes flickered with amusement. He knew exactly what she was doing, playing the role of the helpless princess to manipulate him, but he wasn't so easily swayed. He opened his mouth to refuse again, but before he could, Claude's cold voice cut through the air like a blade. "What could be more important than keeping us safe from that witch?" The emperor's tone was even, but the underlying threat was clear. Lucas turned his gaze toward Claude, meeting his stare with that same indifferent arrogance that made even the most powerful nobles tremble. "My sanity," he answered bluntly. A tense silence filled the room. Claude's eyes narrowed, his fingers twitching ever so slightly, as if contemplating whether or not this insolent brat was worth the trouble. But Lucas wasn't just any boy, he was a being of immense power, one whose origins Claude had long suspected. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, how he spoke, how he knew things no ordinary person should. Claude had never voiced his suspicions aloud, but he had his own theories. The boy's proficiency in magic was unnerving. He didn't act like someone who had merely learned it, he wielded it as if it were second nature, as if he had lived with it for centuries. There was only one person in history who fit that description, the Dark Wizard of the Tower. If Lucas was truly that being, then it would be foolish to antagonize him. For now. Claude leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Do whatever you want with that witch if she irritates you," he said dismissively, waving a hand. "You'll face no consequences." Athanasia gasped, whirling around to face her father in protest. "Papa. That's not what I meant." But before she could finish, Lucas glanced down at her, his glowing red eyes sharp as he took in her desperate expression. He wasn't easily swayed, but something about the way Athanasia clung to his sleeve, her crystal blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears, made him pause. "Just don't kill anyone," she pleaded softly, gripping his sleeve tighter. Lucas tilted his head, studying her for a long moment. Then, finally, with an exasperated sigh, he reached up and pried her hands off him. "Tch fine," he muttered, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "But if she annoys me too much, I make no promises." Athanasia let out a breath of relief, while Claude merely smirked, amused by the exchange. Lucas turned on his heel, his robes billowing as he headed for the door. Just before stepping out, he threw one last glance over his shoulder. "I expect a proper reward for this, princess," he drawled lazily. "I don't work for free." Athanasia groaned, throwing her hands up. Of course you don't. With that, Lucas disappeared into the corridors of the Garnet Palace, leaving behind an exasperated princess and an emperor who, despite everything, looked far too entertained by the entire ordeal. The palace servants had grown accustomed to the peculiar dynamic between Princess Athanasia and Lucas. They had witnessed it enough times to recognize the pattern. The princess, ever so clever, knew exactly how to manipulate Lucas's moods, while Lucas, despite his complaints and sarcasm, always ended up going along with whatever she wanted. And today was no different. Take a break, Lucas said lazily, leaning against the edge of her desk with his usual air of indifference. Athanasia barely spared him a glance, her quill scratching furiously against the parchment. I can't right now. I have to get this done. Lucas let out an exaggerated sigh and straightened up. Then I guess I'll take a break too. See you next spring. Athanasia's quill stopped mid-stroke. Her head snapped up so fast it nearly gave her whiplash. On second thought, she said, forcing a bright, innocent smile as she stood up, I am feeling a bit tired. A short break wouldn't hurt. Lucas smirked, clearly pleased with how quickly she had caved. That's what I thought. The nearby palace servants, who had been silently observing, exchanged knowing glances. She's been acting like this all week, one of the maids whispered to her companion. Did you see how fast she changed her mind? The princess never gives up on work unless she's up to something. She must have asked him for a favor again. The head maid, who had been working in the palace for years, simply sighed and shook her head. It's always the same. The princess tries to be subtle, but Lucas isn't fooled. He just likes making her work for it. As Athanasia and Lucas exited the study together, the whispers grew. Whatever she had requested from him, it was bound to be something important, and if Lucas had agreed to it, no doubt it would turn the palace upside down soon enough. Like, comment and subscribe to be notified for updates in the series.